In Luke chapter 10, Jesus tells us to love your neighbor as yourself. Let's open with prayer. Dear God, thank you for bringing us together this morning. Open our eyes, ears, and hearts that we may learn a little more about your word. May we truly be a friend to our neighbors surrounding us. And Nancy, please introduce the speaker. Good morning. It's so nice to see each of you. So you can't hear the thing. You know what this is? Just put it so that you're close to the microphone. Okay, is that better? Yeah. Well, good morning again, and it's so nice to see each of you here today. We are in for a real treat. Jim Llewelyn is a relatively new member of our church, and he's he and Carolyn Booth are what we like to be members. They just jumped right in and got involved in things. Jim is a member of our Monday Book Club, and he recommended the book Voices of Bible by Barbara King Solomon. Is set in the Belgian Congo in the 1960s. I think it's just a great book. And what makes him so qualified and interested in speaking to us this morning is that Jim was in Gambia. And he tried to find the globe. It's hard to find. It's a little teeny sliver that runs right through the center of Senegal. But he was there in 1972 to 1974. And so he's going to share his experiences with us. I also remind you that I have a little display over here and some of our books that relate to Africa. And I have a globe with it, with Gambia identified, so you might look at that after.
That's good one. Today, what I want to do is go over the geography of the Gambia. She said it's hard to find them some lamps. Then to some important issues in history in the Gambia. Then I want to talk about literacy, languages, and religion. And after that, I've got some others.
Excuse me, we really can't hear you.
You can't hear?
That doesn't help.
Okay. No, what I was saying is I'd like to, this morning, go over the Gambia geography, the history, the literacy, the languages, and the religion. And if we got time, I've got some, got a few other subjects here. First, I want to pass out two maps. One of them is a map of West Africa, so you can kind of see where the Gambia is. And the other is a map actually of the country of Gambia. So in the second map here is a map just of Gambia itself.
Maybe you can hold it from what it's your mouth.
Is that better?
Speak up, right up.
Okay, there we go. map of West Africa here, you'll see that the Senegal, as Nancy mentioned, Senegal surrounds the Gambia except for the part of the land coast. I will maybe occasionally mention Senegal if I talk. The capital of Dakar is marked on there, and we mentioned that, and also the country of Mauritania. All three countries I visited while I was in the East there. Gambia is the smallest country on the African continent. You can imagine that. It's about half the size of the state of Massachusetts. And I think the reason it looks so small is Africa is so much bigger than North America is. Today, the population when I was there in 1972 was about 500,000 people. I looked up today, it's around 1.9 million people. So the population would be significantly more than when I was there. The highest elevation of the country is 173 feet. So you've got a few little hills and you've got the river and that's pretty much the country. The Gambia River runs right through the middle of the country. It's one of the major rivers of West Africa. And in the Gambia, it's navigable river, which is rare in Africa. When I was there was no bridges across the river, it was only ferry bridges. The occupation mainly was raising rice, peanuts, sorghum, cattle, and chicken. As we transition to the Gambia history, in the 1790s, England was looking to replace the lost American colonies, and they turned to Africa. At the time, Africa, the interior of Africa was just unknown. The coastline had been mapped, but that's not it. And Africa would not be easy to explore. So the English African Association, they hire several explorers, but the one I want to focus on today is Mungo Park. And in 1795, Mungo Park comes to the Gambia. And he lived there like 3 or 4 months, learns the Mandinka language, and he's a biologist, so he looks at the stuff that's growing and learns what they're eating and their lifestyle and everything, so forth. So his ultimate goal was to go to what today we know as the Niger River, much further east. But the important part for us is the part he did in the Gambia. When he got home to England, he wrote this book, Travels in the Interior Districts of Africa, that describes all his trips and so forth about West Africa. And it's really the best historical documentation that we have before we get to the 18th century and the colonization of Africa, to the 19th century, the colonization of Africa. The amazing thing about this book, it's never been out of publish. It's been continuously published for over 200 years. And there's not many books that contain that. So that's why it's still today a very good reference on how things were in the Gambia in 1795. The book also inspired several other authors, such as William Woodward, Herman Melville, Ernest Hemingway, Joseph Conrad, and T.C. Boyle. They all were influenced by this book. In 1807, England outlaws the slave trade. And at the time, they were involved in the Napoleonic War, so there was no enforcement of the ban or anything like that. But at the end of the war in 1816, English establishes military posts on the Gambia, on both sides of the Gambia River to stop the external slave trade. one of the military posts becomes the capital of Gambia, Banjul, and the city that we have today. But it was founded to stop the slave trade. The post, one of the corners of the military post was at the post office compound where I worked. I worked on upgrading the telephone system there. And the telephone network, like most places in the world except the US, was run by the post office. So when I'm in my talk, I'll say I will, occasionally mention about being in the post office because that's really where I worked. England went on to outlaw slavery in 1833. On January 13th, 1943, Air Force One was going to be a river. What an accomplishment. On board was President Franklin Roosevelt, General George Marshall, and a number of the Roosevelt administration. Their ultimate destination was Pennsylvania, to have a meeting with Wilson Fortress. This was an epic trip for President Roosevelt. 4 days earlier, he left the White House under the cover of darkness to get the train's mind. After a 27-hour trip, the train arrives in Miami at 1:30 in the morning, and he was transferred to Air Force One. Air Force One leaves Miami for Trinidad at 6 a.m. It arrives in Trinidad at 4:25 p.m. They spend the night there, and the next morning at 6 a.m. they leave Trinidad for Llewelyn, Brazil. They arrive in Llewelyn at 3:30 that afternoon, put on additional fuel and supplies on the plane, and they take off at 7 p.m. for the Gambia. It's a 19-hour flight trip over the Atlantic Ocean that he made. They arrive in the Gambia. He takes a waterfront tour of the Gambia that day, and the next morning he takes the motorcade through Banjul and goes right past where I would later work. His trip to Casablanca was rounded over the 10,000-foot Atlas Mountains north of the Gambia, and he has to be given oxygen since the plane was unpressurized. FDR makes his return trip back to the Gambia. The stopover in the Gambia reinforces President Roosevelt's opposition to colonialism. That was an important thing for him. And had he lived longer, we would have probably seen more of that kind of policy enforced. But Gambia becomes an independent nation in 1965. And I was just there, a few years later, and it was a peaceful transition, not anything like the city of the poison word violence. And around the government, they kept a number of critical people to keep the government running, and the technical people to keep the water plant running, and those kinds of things that other countries did not have trouble with. So the next thing important happens in the Gambia is reach. Alex Haley, he was there while I was there, but I did not know. And it was just a mile down the road from where I worked. But anyway, he goes to the Gambia, he traces back his running back to the Gambia. And this is the story of Luke. This is also a little bit of the Crossroads Presbyterian Church in Alamance County that's involved here too. Just think for a moment how your life will be different if you could not read or write, books, magazines, newspapers would be gone. You couldn't, oh, okay, you couldn't read the Bible, the church bulletin, or the church newsletter. Literacy in the Gambia when I was there was 15%.
Wow.
The local African languages are only spoken, they are not written. So like it work, what I found is that inside technicians for the telephone system are required to be able to read and write. But the outside ones who are linemen and cable collectors and so forth, that I help with on a regular basis. Most of them do not. And so when they come along, they pay everybody in cash, and they have the county ticket, and you can either put your thumbnail on, or your thumbprint on the record, or you can sign your name. And so you can look at the sheet there and know which one is sign names and which one don't. So it's one, that's one of the big changes that, you know, I experienced was the literacy. The English, Arabic, and French are the written languages that are used in the Gambia. Languages are the three most widely used African language in the Gambia is Wolof, Mandinka, and Pula. And English is the official language of the government. But if you go down the street, you know, you just hear Wolof or Mandinka or something. You don't hear English usually. Arabic is widely used by the numerous Arab shopkeepers that are in the Gambia, and they keep their record in order to supply. To help people that have low literacy, the post office has a translator out in at the very front of the post office. So if you receive a letter but you don't know how to read, you can take it to him, and he can read it in whatever language you speak real well, because he can read, you know, English, Arabic, and French. And similarly, if you want to write a letter, you can go to him, tell him what to write, he'll write the letter for you and post it in the post office. So they make make accommodations for people that couldn't read or write, because otherwise the post office wouldn't be very bad. The numerous languages mean that the evening news on Radio Gambia is broadcast in 6 languages. Now, the newscast is 10 hours, 10 minutes long, so it takes an hour to broadcast one section of the news. I learned some of the Wolof language. The family I lived with was Wolof. The market I went to, they spoke Wolof. The languages work got complicated one. If I spoke Wolof for a while, and then one day on the line came and said, you don't speak language, because there's more languages in the Gambia than any other province. So I take on learn a little bit of Mandinka. But then about 2 weeks later, my rigger comes in one day and says, I heard you speaking some Mandinka, you ought to learn Pula, because there's more Pula than any other language. And so I decided, this is really getting complicated. So I'm going to speak English at work, because that's what they expect. You to speak and think that it's official. And I'll speak Wolof at the market, and the compound I live in, and so forth. So that seemed to solve the things like that. But even then, things get kind of complicated. When I went out to the line crew, and they were talking about the pin numbers and the cross arms, they would use the Wolof numbering system. But if they were talking about the telephone numbers, they would do that in English. And meanwhile, they would use the French name for the ladder that they're carrying to climb up the pole. One of the real surprises to me in Gambia was the technicians called the telephone switch distracted. And that just blew me away because it was invented by a man named Alton Strouder in Kansas City, Missouri, near where I grew up. And anyway, he invented the two motion selectors, and it was widely used even in this country until the 1980s. There were millions of lines attached to it, but it's just, you get in a strange country and here they haven't heard this guy's name. In this country, we don't even know who he is. One of the things that I accomplished on the first day at work, about halfway through the morning, suddenly there was a call for prayer. And the monks, it's about 4 blocks down the street. And suddenly about 25 of the employees drop what they're doing. Prayer rooms appeared magically out of all kinds of corners and closets and everything else. And 25, employees are lined up for the morning prayer in contact. And it's just kind of amazing. And they do this very, very religious. And it's not. The family all they would, they line up for prayer and so forth. So that's one of the pillars of Islam is, pray 5 times a day. Another thing that we like to talk about is religious pilgrimages. And obviously going to Mecca is the ultimate one. And I found that after they went to Mecca each year, the people, whoever went would have a talk in the streets, not very far from where I live, about going to Mecca. So anyone that wanted to know about going to Mecca, the people that went to Mecca just had nightly sessions, nightly speeches to tell people about going to Mecca. But you don't need to always just go to Mecca. When I was there, there was a whole city of Tuba, Senegal, that was about maybe 100 miles north of Gambia. And it was a town with about 10, 15,000 people, but they had just finished a big mosque there. There's some holy person in Islam at one time lived in that town. Well, I look up today, and Tuba is a town of 1 million people. And not only that, the pilgrimages, some of the recent pilgrimages that were between 4 and 5 million people for a week at a time. It's amazing. Religious pilgrimages. And you wonder, if there's 4 or 5 million people show up in Cuba and have a place to sit. And the answer is, one of the strong points in their religion and their lifestyle is you have a stranger and you have strangers. And so everybody in Cuba is expected to invite strangers into their house for a whole week for the pilgrimages. Another thing that there was 2 more they were in middle school that lived near where I lived, and they were telling me one day they were memorizing the Quran. That was their goal, was to memorize the Quran. And they were working on it every day after school. And I thought that was a remarkable, project, because we don't think much about sitting down and memorizing the Bible. And maybe because of the low literacy rate that people do take it one takes a part like that on. Another thing that's much different is your health issues. There are just a lot of tropical diseases and so forth, like malaria, cholera, anything, yellow fever, tuberculosis, typhoid fever. and so forth that are just around that we're not used to dealing with. I also found that if the person over there kind of not feeling one well, it's, you just don't feel well. You get so sick so quick because, there's so many other bugs there, so to speak. So if you're well, things go fine. If you're not feeling good, you probably can't get out of bed. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. The hospitals there have no kitchen. So if you go to the hospital and you eat and you think you're going to want to eat, you better find someone that's going to ready you some food. And so every morning, I'd walk by one of the main hospitals because that was between Jackson Park and where I worked. And there would be, 30, 40 women out cooking meals on the front yard of the hospital. So it was really quite. Then we also had several Peace Corps volunteers that worked at the hospital and the hospital lab. And one was telling me one day that he was taking a TB test or somebody, and he come up with a real high reading. And so he thought he'd done something wrong, so he really looked, redid it again, and it still came out high. And finally asked him, well, what is this person? And they said, well, he's sitting out in the waiting room. And then I said, this is amazing because in the state that when you're rating this high, it's when you're dead. So they do develop, inflammation, develop like malaria, and they develop some immunity to some of these diseases over a period of time, but they still have to deal with it. Maybe I could draw something here right quick and show you how people live. They live outside. I'll draw what is called the compound, because that's what they call it and so forth. And they build a wall around it, basically covers it almost the whole lot. Then they'll have a bench right here to sit out and talk to people walking by and so forth. And then they'll, back here will be be an outdoor kitchen, maybe a shed, and then, but that's the kitchen, and then the house will basically be bedroom. This one also, the living room in here and stuff. But most people, but it's basically used just for sleeping, and then during the daytime, of course, they're doing cooking here all day activity almost.
Do they cook?
Oh, okay, let's get down to food here. Yeah, that's the next item here. Rice and ground storage, and we call that Milo in this country. But it's kind of a base. In other words, your meal is in a bowl. Everything is just in a bowl, everything together. So on the bottom is rice and ground Milo or sort. And I found that kind of hard to get used to eating. It really has a texture like steam. And so, it's like, Milo grows, or actually they call it sorghum, grows very easily there. So they use that. And then they put okra and spices and either fish or beef on top, or cassava, and it's called manioc in the portion of the Bible book. They eat twice a day. They have a little breakfast, and then the main meal is at like 4:30 or 5 or 6 in the evening. So at work, we work 6 days a week. That's government, what the government does there. And they work from 8 to 3 on Mondays through Thursdays, and then on Fridays and Saturdays, you get off. So, but there's no break, there's no lunch break, not anything, it's just, you just work straight through. Did I answer most of your questions?
Yes, were they in that table?
Yeah. People all different sizes, kind of like you see here. You also have to remember that as far as food goes, they don't have refrigeration over there. So it really makes a big difference in what you do. So about 2 blocks from me was where they slaughtered the cattle for the local market, 3 blocks from me. And, you know, they slaughter a cow in the morning, they try to have it all sold by lunch, you know, by midday. And they would cook it that night. So, I mean, just like the fish that would come in would, make it a day, and then you ate it. The other thing is that they did have bread, but it was in these real small cylinders, like a cylinder. And the thing I noticed about the bread is, you know, of course, if they would deliver bread, they'd have a guy would put it on his head and have like 3 by 3 board up there, and then that's where the bread, how the bread, in other words, you'd be walking down the street with the bread and so forth. And if you went and got it, it tasted real good and fresh. But if you let that bread out for 4 days, you can use it for candy. They didn't put in, they certainly didn't. Go back to food and here on I thought, I lived in the Llewelyn, and the father was actually a police officer. When I moved in there, he had 3 wives, and he married the 4th one while I lived there. In fact, this 4th one worked for him. But the other one, he only kept 1 wife at that time, and the other wives were scattered somewhere else. I don't know where they. But polygamy is widespread. Seems to be accepted. The main rule is you have to each one you have to be equal with. In other words, you just have to be equal with each one. One of the other things that's kind of interesting there is they have what they call shipment service around the country. And basically that's like a cab that runs from this car park in this town, to this car park in that town. Or from this car park down to the river, and you get the boat on the other side, then you get another taxi on the other side. And you can get around quite well. And that's how most people decide to walk. Just by these gates, and it's kind of interesting, you know. Of course, some of them you might not want to get on because you look at them and you wonder how they like to get down the road. And the other one, you get on one that's got too many chickens or goats or something on it, and that's not good either. But the chickens were brought to the market and obviously live because of lack of refrigeration. Next, we'll cover one thing here. Anyway, one of the things I want to cover is the Gambia has a unique music instrument. It's called a corp, and it's a member of the harp family. And there's 21 strings, and it's made with a gourd. Well, that seems around.
What is the spring plan?
I'm gonna say leather, but I'm not sure. I know, I understand killing these is kind of, is quite complicated. Yeah, one day I was down, walking by the, ferry terminal, and there was a crowd gathering there. So that's kind of thought, it's kind of unusual, so I stopped and asked them what was going on. Well, they said on the next ferry was an American lady that could play the corp. And no one had ever heard of an American lady there playing the corp. And so, sure enough, he got off the ferry and was going back to the farm where they do lots of make these instruments, and she was playing down there, and someone told me that she was quite good at it.
Do you have any ice?
Rare. No, they don't have crazy weather. Weather, you know, the weather in the winter can make it down to 50 or something, and then in the summer, it'll go up to 100, and go to 115 or something.
Yeah, that's my question. Water. You sound like you drinking water?
Yeah, drinking water is something you have to be real careful with because of the diseases and everything. Yeah. In Vanderbilt, I just drank out of the faucet. They said the water was okay there. And part of the reason was when they built the town, it's all surrounded by salt water. So they had to put in a centralized water system there. But elsewhere, when I go around the country, you want to, before you drink it, and you want to know which well. There are some wells that look good and some weren't. And so you had to kind of be knowledgeable on well. Another thing that's kind of unique, unique there that I think I'm really interested is they have a great line that just works wonderful. One was first started after being there about a month, I was looking for a partnership. And even though I worked right next door to the main market and in the downtown, there was no barber shop to be seen anymore. And I later kind of found out that, well, the barbers were the ones carrying the stool and one hand and people on the other hand. People around town until your house and they get hold of them, and it's kind of a little fun because they don't have to talk to them and everything. So I just dropped the notion that I like to see a barber, and that, you know, and about 2 days later, the reply was, well, I'll be there a certain date, certain time. And I went to the barber and I did the same thing with contractors. We had contractors with the telephone system, and I didn't know where they lived. They didn't have a phone number or anything, but when I needed them, I would just drop the word in the grapevine, and then about 2 days later, they could show up in my office. It worked real well. In 1974, they had a draft, and the draft, as I remember more, the trip I made in Senegal to the car than I did in Gambia, because, and I've heard this, but the road to the car literally was literally kept. And it's hard to even imagine mile after mile, but what had happened is everything there is open range. So, you know, your cattle and everybody else's cattle, it's the same, you know. And cattle are looked upon as a bank. Your wealth is the number of cattle, okay? But then when you get a drought, then there really isn't no real incentive to get rid of cattle until they get so weak that we can't get to the market. So that that will always stick with me. And when you get to the car, you get to the hotel and you check in, you give them the key, and then they give you a bottle of water. And that bottle of water is what you use for drinking, and flushing the toilet and everything else while you're there. The Peace Corps in Gambia, what you might be interested in, at the time I was there were 35 volunteers. They taught in school all the way up and down the country. And then the other 15 volunteers were like me that worked in the Gambia government office. We had 3 volunteers in the hospital lab, 2 volunteers in the agricultural department. And they were involved in introducing the Rhode Island red chickens to the Gambians because they were much more nutritious than the old chickens they were using. We had a volunteer that walked through. Had a couple of volunteers that worked in the corp office. One worked in city planning, and I worked in the post office. I was the first volunteer, peaceful volunteer that ever worked there. So it was kind of new for both of us. During my last month in Gambia, the 2 top and they said, you know, we don't understand you, how you come in and do this work, and you're excited. How do you do that? And so I went down and got my maps. And I had maps of all the towns that had telephones in them in the country. And I showed them, you know, my field notes and outside plant, all the outside plant stuff on them, and said, you know, I use this to do the work. So, but I think part of the questions I thought about in the years since then, the comments that I think that they grew up without literacy and they're not used to sitting and working stuff on pencils and paper, drawing, all the things that we do in this country. And so that's probably why they asked me the question. And finally, as Nancy mentioned, I want to mention the pointing revival. That's the September book that we're going to cover. And basically, it's the story of Nathan Price, his wife, and 4 daughters that went to the Congo in 1960. And I find it very realistic. And some of the things that they talk about in this book, I actually saw it again. So I find it's a very realistic book and kind of an interesting book. The book is classified as fiction, but the events in the book are not fiction. It's just the people. Do you have any questions?
Did all wives live together?
No. No. I think each family made their own kind of arrangements, but the family I lived with, he had his wives, his other wives lived elsewhere. I don't know exactly why. The room I had was probably the room that one of his wives had, and all of the wives lived there.
Well, I'm intrigued by this business of equality among wives. First question is, did he have a scorecard? Second question, did the husband go to the wives or the wives come to the husband?
Probably we went to the wives. From what I understand, some of the wives that got married or their second wife, you know, like if they were the first wife, that was fine. But then when the second wife came along, they weren't really in favor of the second wife, and certainly not the first wife. So, you know, it was kind of the man's decision. But it was widespread, you know, widely accepted. I think the thing that made that started decades or probably centuries ago, because there was a war and a lot of guys got killed. And a single woman really doesn't have a place in their society. Maybe be a better way of putting it. Although, you know, I knew one or two, but in their society, everybody would be married and have a family and supporting them. So,
One more question on that subject. Would a woman have multiple husbands?
no. But along that line, one day there was a little girl, maybe she was 4 or 5, running around the compound, and so she's been there several times, and finally I asked one, how is she related? Well, what I didn't thought about before I asked the question is how complicated your family is when you have 2, 3, and 4 wives, and there are several generations of them.
What kind of, toilet or bathroom did you have?
Well, we had a one W hole, we might call it, for a shower. I mean, it just, the top, there was a roof over it, but there was just ventilation around it, okay? And so in the winter time, you didn't want to go take a shower. The first thing in the morning, because the water was just freezing. If you waited until mid-afternoon, the sunlight had hit the water side, and it was much more. And then we just had, you know, just a regular toilet.
And what year was this game?
Excuse
What
me?
year was it?
Oh, 1972 or 74. Yes.
You know, as a result of all these marriages, we have children. Okay, so these children, are they educated at all? Who does that? Is the Peace Corps, do they have a missionary? Or how's that?
No, the Indian government has quite a few schools around the country. And the Peace Corps volunteers that I mentioned here were just for math and science teachers. That Peace Corps for math and science teachers, the English teachers and so forth, come from household or Navy, they've had enough training in countries to do that. Along that line, there was the IT International Telecommunications Union had a training school there for like telephone technicians, one technicians who work at the radio station, and you know, they've been going like months. So that was kind of a specialized school, and I was down just a couple of times. So every year they do. I would think everyone maybe went to school, and they still ages maybe 12, 10, 12. I don't think all of them.
What did they wear?
No, it's clothes like, you know, and they had tight, what we call tie out clothing. And you could go to the market and say, you want a suit, and they would, you know, measure you up and make a suit like one you want. And it'd be a thread machine, you know, it was a thread machine. What's in and everything, bottom things, that's all.
How did you get the labels?
I don't know.
Your labels, did you, Peace Corps feed you or the family feed you?
Food, I with the family, you know, I just paid, paid some money to the family, and they bought the food, and I just ate, you know, generally what they.
You volunteer. Things are all better than better, but I don't know that Jill would understand it if we were late for, service, but I think I have to put it out here good. Jill, thank you so much. I think when we walked in the room, Gambia was no more than a dot on the map, a very complicated map of Africa, and now I think we actually have a hearing for it. Nothing I actually appreciate before you go Bible, or it's a different country, so thank you. Yes, sir. We're gonna pass the plate. We're not gonna pass the plate. Only supposed to put my, remember, we haven't been here very long. and We pay Sandy in September. So, there's a plate there, plate over there. Use it. And next Sunday, I think we're gonna be ready to call, but I'll let you know for sure on Saturday. What is that ceremony? Or we can go to the ceremony. Okay, in closing,
Next, make a, announcement about the Monday Book Club.
yes,
This is part of, everyone's invited, whether you're an official member or not, whether you've read Portsmouth Bible or not. It's the second Monday in September at 10:30. So we'll have another opportunity to hear from Jim. So please feel free to put that on your calendar and spread the word to others because we'd love to have you be part of it. And we know we'd love to hear more about Jim's story. So second Monday, 10:30, right down the hall, in the classroom.
anyway, I did put part of the book clubs in my message yesterday.
Thank you.
I'm gonna close with some excerpts from an Irish lesson. God bless the corners of this house. Bless each door that opens wide to strangers since the beginning. The peace of man, the peace of God, the peace of love to all. Go in peace.